So you probably wonder, what causes airgun POI shift? Well, I created a checklist to solve it. If you follow these 6 topics I'm about to share with you, you should be set on POI shifting. So let's get into it. Number 1 is the scope magnification. If you shoot with a scope that has variable power, the best way to avoid POI shifting is to set the scope on the highest setting of the variable power and zero that scope in to that rifle at a set distance. I have been shooting air guns for over 25 years, and I have been reading the manuals for the scopes that I have been buying for my air guns throughout the years, and for some reason they always say to turn the magnification on the fullest setting and sight in and zero that way. I don't know why recently in a lot of scope manuals it doesn't say that anymore. Well, I've always done that, so I assumed that most people knew that, and that's why you always ask me in a lot of my comments below of my videos, you know, if I ever witnessed POI shifting, and that's how I set my scopes up, because I don't. So scope magnification is number 1, and it can cause a POI shifting, because if you're not turned in on the highest setting and you turn your turrets, they are not true measurements. The turret is actually calculated per distance per click for that scope at the highest setting. So when you zero your rifle again at the highest magnification, you can then turn the setting down and shoot at any distance you want, and should not witness any POI shifting like I have done previously. The number 2 reason I have on my list is your shooting position. If you are shooting and zeroing on a bench rest, whether it's a gun rest or bags, and then you decide to take it out and offhand shoot or shoot off a shooting stick or whatever have you, that can be your reason for POI shifting. You need to set up the gun the way that you project it to be used. So if you're going to be sighting in an air rifle for squirrel hunting and you're going to be standing and not using a shooting stick, that's how you should set it up. If you're going to be using a shooting stick, zero the rifle in with the shooting stick. Because if you've known in past videos, I've shared how to zero scopes, and you could see that from switching from a bench to standing, offhand, to a tripod, or using a shooting stick, it all matters. Another known issue that causes POI shifting is adding anything to the muzzle of an airgun barrel. Whether it's baffles, adapter, moderator, barrel band, whatever have you, you just add it on there, you just put it on, it will change the POI. Another reason that you can have a POI shift is because your pellet is barely clipping your baffles or your moderator or whatever you have on the end here. If the pellet is barely clipping it, it'll throw it off. The 4th reason that I have on my list for POI shifting is if your airgun has a probe O-ring on it and that is wearing out or going bad, your shots will start to go everywhere and it won't be exactly where you sighted in at previously. So definitely check your O-rings, and it's not just the probe O-ring in these guns. It could be really any O-ring, but that's the main one that causes erratic shooting. The 5th reason I have on my list, guys, is your airgun tune. Now, with that said, if you're shooting a regulated airgun and the tune is perfect, the only thing you should see is your pellet just shifting very little up and down. Whereas on an unregulated air gun, you'll see your string or shot string throughout the shot cycle at a diagonal, because the hammer is starting to overpower your back pressure or PSI volume in the air cylinder. Okay, so lastly, and the most important, number 6, the weather. Now, you have heard me talk about this. You've heard me talk about POI shifting before in previous videos, and I've shot in almost the same weather. and not noticed very much POI shifting, just minimal from day to day at different times of the day and all that. But when there is a big difference in temperature change, like a 30 or 40 degrees difference, you will notice something, and you'll notice your gun not shooting exactly where you're aiming at, and there's a reason for that. So what happens is, in your scopes, you have a return spring that keeps tension for your turrets. And if that shrinks, that means your reticle shifted. Now, what happens is, depending on what style of scope and return spring you have in your scope, that can cause a POI shifting as well. If your scope has that little knob sticking out the side of it on the left side, that means that the spring is pointing at an angle to compensate for your turrets up and down and left and right to keep your reticle as centered as possible. But again, in cold weather, that causes metal properties to shrink. So your reticle shifts over, and that makes your shot point to the right. Now, if your scope does not have that little knob on the side and it's flat on the bottom, or there is nothing that you can see, it has a flat leaf spring style return spring on the turrets. So the only variance that happens in that reticle of that scope is up and down. So from the time you sighted it in warmer weather and there is a 30 or 40 degree difference, your reticle will shift up and down depending on the weather. So if you tried all these on my checklist for POI shifting and you are still getting a shift, then there is something wrong mechanically. Either your hammer spring, valve, it could be anything really. This I just shared with you as if the gun is in working order. So I hope you see here as to why I said all these, because I've been testing all these out over many, many years, and I have videos to back this up. As you guys see me study the scopes, you see me study the weather patterns, you've seen me study everyday shooting, because that's what I was doing. And I could tell you the most consistency I've ever seen out of an air gun is with a break barrel using a fixed power scope. So we can only control what we can control, and we can't control the weather unless you shoot indoors in a controlled environment all the time. But with that 4-power scope, there is no variable power, and the only real issue that comes at play is the temperature outside, which causes the pellets to decrease their FPS downrange due to the colder air, but that is it. And at close range, you might not notice that big of a shift. Again, it should only be vertical. So everybody, I appreciate you watching as always, and I hope I helped you figure out your POI shift. Because again, I assume that most people knew this, but I wanted to break it down and show you why. So thanks again for watching. Hope to see you on the next one.